Whether you call it the deep state, the steady state, the shadow government, a shell game, the octopus of global control, we're basically talking about the same thing. A rose by any other name is just as thorny. I'm joined today by two very special guests. Together, I believe, for the first time, we've got, of course, Scott Bennett and Charlie Robinson. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me today. How are you both?
Doing good, Jason.
I'm great, Jason. How about you? How are you doing? How's the polar vortex treating you?
It's crazy. It was 5 degrees when I woke up this morning, and I think it's about 8 right now. So for our friends in Europe, that's Fahrenheit, so well below freezing. But it seems that the discord in the American political discourse is only heating up every day. You guys are both uniquely qualified to speak on this. Of course, Scott has written the book Shell Game, and his experience as an Army intelligence officer and later as a contractor in Booz Allen Hamilton informs a great deal of his research. People can go to shellgamewhistleblower.com and read all about Scott. They can financially contribute to his efforts and purchase the various books that he's written, including the book Shell Game. And of course, people are going to remember that Charlie was with us just, I think, 2 weeks ago. Charlie is a former real estate broker, current real estate broker.
Still.
There in Las Vegas. He was front and center for the economic collapse caused by the subprime mortgage crisis in 2008. And his book, The Octopus of Global Control, among other things, describes how international banking cartels have put other independent nations under the cloud of debt that so many U.S. homeowners suffered from. Scott, you and I were speaking this morning about a number of extremely troubling events that are percolating around the world. Where would you like to begin the discussion? Scott? We got you on mute, I think, Scott.
Okay. No, something was wrong with my computer. My cursor wasn't going anywhere. That's very odd.
Not surprised.
You know, what we're talking about that is kind of a good overlay for this, Jason, is there's a lot of talk in the news about QAnon, about X22 report, about all of these things that are analyzing the current events and the political events and trying to define them or categorize them as psyops within psyops, as the plan, as QAnon's this, or whatever it may be. And it causes a lot of people confusion. It causes a lot of people to just bow out because it's so overwhelming. And, you know, when you and I were talking today, it came to me that in one sense, the way to always talk about these things and address them is going right for what should be said, what should be done, what is morally right, what is naturally right, what is harmonious with the instincts of the good Americans. And that is the looking at this like true north versus magnetic north. And when I was in the military and you go through training and navigating and land navigation and things like that, you have to reconcile true and magnetic north. And it's important to recognize all of the psyops, all of the stuff that's being done pulls people in sort of a magnetic direction and influences their minds and pulls them in these directions, whereas that can be very speculative. But if we stay to the map of what is true, what does America stand for, what do we stand for, what should the president be doing, how do we understand Bolton and all of these things, it leads people into staying with the simple a simple right conclusion on things, whether it's Venezuela, whether it's the relationship between Russia and the United States, whether it's the Russian missile treaty, whether it's Europe, whether it's Iran, whether it's, you know, the Venezuelan coup, all of these things. So what we always have to stick to is what should the president be doing, what should he not be doing, what is the real assessment of what's going on in Venezuela and what's going on in Russia, and the weapons treaty and things like that. So I think that's
Well,
a good overlay.
let's stay on Venezuela for a moment, Scott, because it's relevant to what we're talking about. And there's this article today in the Washington Post talking about the Maduro government expelling a journalist in a bid to keep power. And of course, this echoes what's going on in the United States. We've been hearing for 2 years about Russian collusion, but of course, we're not interviewing people like Wilbur Ross, who many publications have pointed out has got business ties with Russia, and now in his role as the U.S. Commerce Secretary, seems like there's the potential for a conflict of interest. Instead, we've been hearing all about conversations that journalists have been having with other journalists. I'm talking about Jerome Corsi, I'm talking about Roger Stone, and of course, they are being run through the ringer for allegedly communicating with a journalist, Julian Assange. We are so far afield from an actual investigation into Russian collusion. And of course, Charlie, you spoke to us last time we met about NewsGuard. What do you think is going on with all this relative to NewsGuard and some of the points that Scott has raised?
Well, they're desperate to get in front of the news. I mean, the alternative media has been exposing what's really going on for a while now. And, you know, this is an example of if you can't beat them, silence them, because what they're doing is instead of taking this news and analyzing it, you know, instead they're looking to silence people. The prime example of this that I felt was a little over a year ago in Las Vegas with the shooting there. When they had the press conference and Laura Loomer raises her hand and says, I have evidence that shows that he checked into the hotel 3 days earlier.
Sit down, lady. We hate evidence.
Sit down. So what would you, in a normal world where a journalist was bringing forth evidence for an investigation that was extremely important, a normal situation, the police chief would say, I'm sorry, come find me after this. I want to know what you have. Let's talk about this. This is interesting. This conflicts with our timeline. I want to know more about it. That wasn't the response. The response was get the hell out. So that's a pretty clear indicator that they're not looking for the truth. In fact, what they're doing is they're looking for people talking about the truth, and then they make the story about them. They go after them, whether that's Julian Assange or Laura Loomer or whoever. The act of journalism, the traditional sense of journalism in the United States with the corporate media is dead. And it's been dead for a while. People don't go into that job. I can't imagine how soul-sucking that must be to be a real journalist, to go, hey, I got a job with the Wall Street Journal or the Washington Post. This is my dream. And then you go put together this great story that you found. You did everything right, and you pitch it, and they just go, we're not running that.
Right.
And you go, but why? It's the truth. And they say, we're not, don't worry about it. This is above your pay grade. We're taking care of this. So you watch the truth get killed over and over again. And in its place, you watch fake news, real fake news, being portrayed as the truth. So everything's upside down. I blame the journalists to a certain extent, but I understand the process. I understand that it's out of their hands at some point. You know, they hand it off to their boss, and their boss has a boss, and you can't run an anti-vaccine investigative expose that's going to crack the case while you're at the same time you're soliciting pharmaceutical companies to advertise in your publication. Right. I mean, it's just that's just not going to fly. And
well, we've heard about
that so
firsthand from Cheryl Atkinson. She just told us earlier this week that that's exactly what she tried to do. And then, BuzzFeed, which I don't know about you guys, but I certainly associate BuzzFeed with fake news. These guys were the primary source for this dossier that has still yet to be proven. I don't know if you guys heard this, but this Belarusian prostitute who came forward a week ago or something was captured in Thailand for teaching sex lessons in Thailand, which is, as far as I know, I've never been to Thailand, but that seems to be like what's going on over there. I don't know why they would arrest her for that, but they nabbed her. She said she had some evidence of, urinating on a bed or doing something with Donald Trump, but it turns out she lied. She said that just to be released from prison. So BuzzFeed, Scott, it seems like a major source of fake news. And here we've got the New York Times telling us that the layoffs from BuzzFeed are devastating to democracy. What I've observed is that BuzzFeed is sort of a seeding ground where they can put out this fake news, and then established brands like the New York Times can say, hey, BuzzFeed reported that Donald Trump got down with a hooker. And they're off the chopping block because they just say, well, we didn't say that was true. We just said BuzzFeed reported it. And this is the same thing that's happening in social media to smear each of us, isn't it?
What is the world coming to when you can't trust the word of a Belarusian hooker? I mean, the world's turned upside down, Jason.
Usually reliable, right?
Always, especially in Thailand, because there's nothing sketchy going on there.
But for real, this is how they set it up, right? We've got BuzzFeed, and this is insidious because, you know, they used to say to, was it John Dillinger, who they asked him why you keep going back to bank robbing, and he said, well, that's where they keep all the money. There's a reason why these trolling campaigns and these fake news campaigns carry on. They must be effective. Scott, you're an expert in psychological operations. What are we looking at here?
Well, what you're looking at is a mainstream media that targets the demographics and the psychographics of a very dulled down, vaccinated, stupefied population, dealing with alcohol or caffeine or tobacco or a combination of limited education. You're really dealing with an American population, and again, I'll pull no punches and make no apologies. When I analyze the American personality, aside from the people, of course, that listen to Crowdsource the Truth and the alternative media, these are really the brighter ones that access your show and listen to these things because they're critical thinkers. They're cynical. They're speculative. They've done research. They know 9/11 was an inside job. It was a false flag attack. It utilized a variety of components. They know the history of that and the usual suspects that are associated with that. Robert Mueller. I mean, it goes right back to Bush. We saw everything in civilization change after September 11, 2001. Yeah. I didn't come to the realization until I'd been thrown in prison by Obama and Eric Holder and Laney Brewer and saw all this. And it really kicked in like a mule kicking me in the gut that I had been deceived, and I joined the military and went on a war fighting campaign for lies and propaganda and all sorts of other alternative motives, whether it's oil confiscation or full spectrum dominance or a neoconservative agenda to turn every country into Starbucks, offices and such. All of this has been an accumulation, and Americans are at their saturation point. So Americans who are able to contain it and analyze this and process it and categorize it are the above intellectual abilities, and by temperament they're a little bit more fierce and fighting, versus all of those the mainstream media influence, ABC, NBC, CBS. They influence a very fat, dumb, and happy side of the population, and they're very dangerous too because of their lethargy. And we never have to forget that Operation Mockingbird, the CIA penetration of the mainstream media, is rampant. And you right now have America in the deep state civil war. You have the president in a civil war. You have President Trump elected in a miraculous overture and removal of Hillary Clinton. What have we seen in the last 2 years but a big Russian hoax conspiracy to try and antagonize mainstream media people into aggression against Russia. And now we're seeing a Venezuelan situation. Now, I always come back again. What is true north? What do the optics say? What if we judge things by what we're seeing, what we're hearing? The optics are very, very bad with regards to why are we meddling with Venezuela? Why is John Bolton on Trump's team? Why is Mike Pompeo on Trump's team? All of these people are neoconservatives that are part of this agenda to continue what Bush started. And the American people are against that.
Scott, talk to us a bit about Mike Pompeo. Have you dealt with him firsthand? I think a lot of people have a pretty positive attitude towards Mike Pompeo in general, but I don't really know very much about him. Of course, he was in at CIA early in the Trump presidency, and now he's the Secretary of State. Did the United States have anything to do with this drone attack on Maduro in Venezuela, Scott?
Well, Mike Pompeo, I don't have any personal like for him. I think he's sort of an idiot. I don't think he's smart enough to really talk. I've seen him on the news, and yesterday I saw him on Hannity, and he's regurgitating a scripted response and you could hear him say, Maduro was not qualified to be president of the United States, instead of catching himself and saying Venezuela. So that's a sign of someone that really isn't all there. And I know Pompeo, when I reported shell game to him, he did absolutely nothing, as did many, many others.
That counts as firsthand experience with him.
Yeah, of course it does. Of course. That's why my experience of all that I know is that I'm true, that I'm real, what I've written is real, what I observed, what I experienced. I didn't plan it. I fell into it, whether by divine coincidence or white helmet orchestration or both. But what I discovered, what I learned, girded and electrified me unlike anything else. And that's what I take to all communication with members of Congress, my analysis of these things. And Pompeo's done nothing. With regards to Maduro and the Venezuelan coup and the drone attack, whether the U.S. had something to do with that, of course, in a sense it did, because nothing would happen without U.S. allowance. Now the question becomes, is this an orchestration to remove Maduro, and is Russia and the United States in agreement with this? Is this going to be a clean removal, a clean deep state removal, or is this going to be another Vietnam? I was the first one to use the word on Monday about Venezuela being the Vietnam, and the next thing I know, Maduro is saying the same thing. So Venezuela can be very ugly, or it can be very easy. It could be a big surprise. It could be a big overthrow. I'm not entirely sure yet, but what we always come back to is what's going on in the United States, what's going on with President Trump, what's going on with our own civil war that the mainstream media has been fomenting, specifically a conflict with Russia, aggression with Russia. And I did an interview this morning on with Russian TV about the INF treaty that the U.S. is staying to pull apart. I said, look, this is all optics. In one sense, it's very good for the U.S. and the Russians to pull out of this, because they develop their own capabilities, missile-wise and technology-wise, and they don't have anything to fear, because there's zero chance that the American people are going to back any conflict with Russia. There's no chance that Europe is going to back a conflict with Russia, despite the optics, despite some of the mainstream media trying to portray Russia as an enemy. The reality is no Europeans fear Russia. Russia is Europe, and the United States under Trump would not be picking a fight with Europe. Russia has to say these things in order to throw off the countermeasures of the deep state, mainstream media, constant Russian meddling in the election, Russian hoax, Russian, is the enemy. And Trump is responding to that by seeming to be antagonistic, but I think it's all kabuki theater.
Right. Well, this is an important thing that you're raising here, Scott. This INF treaty it's just been announced today that the United States and Russia have failed to reconcile differences over a long-standing nuclear pact. And I can't help but wonder if, we're talking about a 2-year-long drumbeat of fake news about how terrible Russia is. And, Russia is obviously feeling this impact. The other thing I want to remind everybody of is that, we've gotten so caught up in who did or did not talk to WikiLeaks, or who may have misremembered or misspoken or lied to Peter Strzok or Andrew McCabe or other duplicitous ex-FBI agents. We've moved away from the fact that what Michael Flynn was doing in his communications with Sergei Kislyak was saying, hey, Barack Obama put these sanctions on Russia over an uncorroborated fake news story that we don't know is true or not. Please try to curtail any Russian reaction that might have a detrimental effect on the people of the United States. And in 2 weeks or whatever it is, when I'm in my job as National Security Advisor, we'll be able to work this out. That's all the guy said. His intentions were good. He's not some rogue person from out of nowhere going and interfering with U.S. diplomacy in Russia. He's the incoming National Security Advisor trying to curtail the guy they should be questioning and indicting is Barack Obama. Now, Charlie, you've brought to my attention that this article about NewsGuard, how they've teamed up to destroy independent media, and it's linked to think tanks and government officials. We've seen this happening. Attacks on Crowdsource The Truth, Laura Loomer deplatformed from Twitter, Alex Jones completely deplatformed, smears against Dr. Corsi, Roger Stone having 29 armed FBI agents crash his door. Talk to us for a second, Charlie, about how NewsGuard and fake news and the proliferation of these false things are putting us very close to a real war.
Well, I mean, fake news becomes real if in their minds, if they repeat it long enough. And if there is somebody that's out there telling the truth, then, you know, Google and Facebook have taken a bunch of heat lately for kicking people off their platforms. But with the emergence of NewsGuard as a standalone separate company, this allows them the ability to say, listen, we're only blocking these people. We're only taking these people off of our platform, or we're not allowing advertising to them, not because we think they're bad, but because an independent company that we've hired is in charge of doing that for us. They're better at that. They're sorting this out. They gave this person or this news organization a red flag, so therefore, you know, we're not the bad guys here because they've taken so much heat. Now, NewsGuard, as we talked about before, is stuffed with from the two creators of it to the investment board or the advisory board to the investors behind it. Every one of them is like a who's who of intelligence agencies, PR firms, advertising agencies, you name it. Almost all of them. The universal link is the members of the Council on Foreign Relations. So this is the absolute worst group of people that you would bring in to be in charge of making sure that the news that you get is accurate or not. They have a vested interest in making sure in deceiving people.
Yeah.
You would have a better chance of figuring out whether something was the truth or not if you picked random people off the street at the mall, because at least you would have the possibility that they don't all have an agenda that's interconnected. But the people that are running NewsGuard, the advisors and the investors, there's a plan. The plan is we're going to silence anybody that is not on board with the American empire. We're going to do that through silencing them. We're going to do that through taking away their advertising. We're going to do that by attacking them and making them fight legal battles that drain their money. We're going to keep them so busy and preoccupied fighting and bickering, you know, against these external forces that they don't have any time to really report on the news. And that's what's happening. I mean, you see this all the time. You see people attacking you, and whether it's true or not is irrelevant, because what it does is it sucks your time, sucks your money. There you go. Yeah,
resources, turns people against you, causes people to believe this fake news. You know, I've just noticed in this article that you sent me, Charlie, right here, it's talking about a guy who we spoke about. I was unaware of him before you brought him to my attention, Richard Stengel, who's a member of the Atlantic Council. Now, we were just reviewing the Roger Stone indictment with Larry Klayman last night. And basically, the very first paragraph of the Roger Stone indictment talks about how the FBI, not the FBI, my bad, talks about how Company One was hired by the DNC and the DCCC to investigate their servers. Now, Company One, of course, is CrowdStrike. The chief technology at CrowdStrike is Dmitry Alperovitch. And of course, Dmitry Alperovitch is a member and major proponent of the Atlantic Council. So basically, CrowdStrike, Atlantic Council member, presents this evidence, which is corroborated by Newsweek, Richard Stengel, NewsGuard, also Atlantic Council member. This doesn't seem like independent, unbiased news.
No, it's not. Of course, this is think tanks getting together. Coming up with a plan, putting their pieces in place. If you're a corrupt, horrible human being trying to take over the planet, this is how you would do it. You would get the people that are leading decision makers at a variety of different companies, and put them together in something like the Atlantic Council or the Council on Foreign Relations, or have Bilderberg meetings or whatever it is, as a group of people come together, get your strategy straight, and then leverage all the assets and the expertise of the people that are a member of the Atlantic Council or the Club of Rome or whatever. There's a variety of these. They're everywhere, and a lot of the members are overlapping, so they're members of multiple groups. They sit on boards of a variety of companies. So it's a great strategy if you're trying to control the narrative, especially if you're the government, because then what you do is you outsource this to a group like the Atlantic Council, have them come up with the ideas, have them put it in place, and then you go, it wasn't us. We're not doing this, until somebody like you digs a little bit deeper, and you go, wait a second, you guys are all going to the same meetings together.
Well, right.
and now we're supposed to believe you? Yeah.
There's someone else who's loosely affiliated with them who launches some sort of seemingly unrelated social media attack to try to knock me out. Now, Scott, you're obviously an ex-Army intelligence officer. You worked at Booz Allen Hamilton. Booz Allen is not a think tank. Obviously, it's a corporation. It's essentially a private intelligence firm. What do we know about these think tanks? It seems like they're everywhere. What the hell are they thinking?
Well, they're prone to their donors, of course, and Heritage Foundation is an example of that. They study according to what their donors give them to study, and they have specific grants in this area, and they're ideological depending on that. Heritage is always somewhat conservative, although it took a direction in the neoconservative world dominance direction. But I wanted to make one quick comment. You're talking about the media and all of this. I personally have firsthand experience with this because, as you know, Jason, I'm not sure if Charlie does, but I'll bring him up to speed. When I was in prison, when I was thrown in prison by the Obama administration, and I had met Brad Birkenfeld and all the WikiLeaks cables that he had given me, which established in me the notion, and I think the American people share this, that WikiLeaks really is a hero of truth. It is a organization that is doing good, rightful things by exposing corruption and all sorts of nefarious activities by people in the U.S. government. They're not really reporting. They're not really writing anything. They're just reporting what the emails and the secret cables and stuff indicate. And that's how we learned a lot about Swiss banking and terrorist financing and the Clinton Foundation involvement and the State Department involvement. And of course, I was at these agencies. I was at the State Department, and I was in the military and at Booz Allen Hamilton. But WikiLeaks provided the evidence and the cables that Brad Birkenfeld had, which indicated the Clintons and the Clinton State Department and the Department of Justice under Eric Holder and Lanny Brewer and Loretta Lynch and a variety of other people at Covington and Burling, the law firm, which ironically or amazingly or corrupted suspiciously represents Michael Flynn right now. Right. They were all part of a racketeering operation. And that's the real thing. That's truth. That's verified in the WikiLeaks cables and the State Department cables. So WikiLeaks was doing a good thing. But when I reported this, September 25th, 2012, when I reported it to James Mattis and General Jeff Jacobs, Mattis was at Central Command. Jacobs was his U.S. Civil Affairs Psychological Operations Command. When I reported this to Senator Bill Nelson, and he reported it to Dianne Feinstein, naming me specifically, who is this Scott Bennett, because Edward Snowden was at Booz Allen Hamilton too. I had Michael Isikoff and Tom Hamburger come up and interview me for 2 hours. And the only thing they said to me was, Mr. Bennett, why do you think the CIA would do this? And I had never mentioned the CIA. And Michael Isikoff later came out as the author of one of the Christopher Steele original stories when he was at Yahoo News. And Tom Hamburger later came out with a story on Donald Trump Jr. Allegedly having access to WikiLeaks cables in 2016 before they became public. So right there, I can connect the dots that Michael Isikoff and Tom Hamburger, who were connected to me, connected to the CIA, have written pro-deep state stories to hurt the president or cause these things to be triggered. That is confirmed. You can take that to the bank. Isikoff and Hamburger are dirty CIA assets. And, we're being attacked because we're telling the truth. I was just attacked when I was on Press TV by this guy named David K. Johnson, who I was debating. And this fool had the gall to put up on Twitter that I had called for the murder of Gavin Newsom, the governor of Gavin Newsom. Now, that's a pretty serious thing to do, and I responded with seriousness by contacting lawyers and talking to them, and I immediately told him, you're a liar, and you need to retract that immediately, or I will take legal action against you. And
Didn't this clown write some book about Donald Trump?
David K. Johnson, I wouldn't doubt it. His Twitter page is David K. C-A-Y.
Well, let's not help promote him on social media,
Right.
But here's a picture of him, and I'm pretty sure this guy wrote some book about Donald Trump that was billed as an explosive expose at the time of the election. But all these people who claim to have, we're living in this evidence-free world. Scott, you just detailed how government cables exposed by WikiLeaks corroborate stories, corroborate things that we know have happened. We could get into a philosophical conversation about what is reality and what we observe, etc. I don't like to use the word proof, but those things are certainly incredibly strong elements of evidence that what WikiLeaks is doing is exposing wrongdoing, but yet all we've heard about is how Hillary Clinton wanted to drone strike Julian Assange. The guy hasn't been able to leave the embassy in London for 7 or 8 years. His health has got to be deteriorating. Hasn't seen his family in 7 years. The UN has already said that he is a prisoner in violation of his human rights. And then Mike Pompeo comes out and says things about WikiLeaks that seem somewhat incongruent with what the press secretary has said.
And see, let me just comment. I'm going to hand it back to Charlie. You're exactly right, Jason. When Mike Pompeo, when any of these clowns get up there and start attacking WikiLeaks as being a foreign intelligence service or any of that nonsense, it's harming the president, because all of us who voted for him see WikiLeaks as a good organization. And anyone who starts coming in with this nonsense about an organization that exposes corruption within our own government is somehow wrong is hiding something themselves, whether it's their own power or their own stupidity or another episode of Epstein Island, perhaps. But when you come out and start saying WikiLeaks is bad, Russia's bad, the U.S. needs to double down on the full Venezuelan conquest, and regime change 2.0 is just around the corner, and next thing we're going to pick a fight with Syria and finish that war and start a new one with Iran, and then we're going to pivot up and go to Russia and then China, and then we're going to live in an Alice in Wonderland world of perfect Starbucks coffee houses and everybody's got to get along, and Walmart. We're entering this demented, delusional mindset of the U.S. has a new religious calling to dominate the world, and the world is going to unite against us. The world is going to choose the other side, because we've done nothing but unleash chaos and destroy regimes from Libya to Ukraine to Syria to Afghanistan to Iraq. Trump was elected to combat those. Trump was elected to make friends with Russia. Trump was elected to get us out of the Middle East wars, get us out of Syria, because Americans were tired of it. They were sick and tired of the deception. They were standing against it. So when these, and I'll say this way, strategic communications is what Charlie was referring to. And we invented it at Booz Allen Hamilton. We invented the term strategic communications.
What does it mean exactly?
Well, strategic communications means you are managing communications on the military level, on the informational level, on the diplomatic level, and on the economic level. On all of these different directionals, you are establishing a consistent, harmonious, complementary message.
So forgive me, Scott. Does that mean if someone like Charlie Robinson, Scott Bennett, Jason Goodman starts a YouTube channel and starts putting out news that is incompatible with the message that they want sent out, each of us would become a target of fake news, of NewsGuard, of any of these things that are, we've heard about the Kinetic North America social media protection appliance. David Hawkins has spoken about it.
The Integrity Initiative.
Yeah, we see the Integrity Initiative. We see people disseminating evidence-free information about me, refusing to provide evidence, just ramping up the smears, and it's having a direct effect on the financial health of Crowdsource the Truth, because there are people who don't know any better. They see information.
Well, they start to call you names when they're losing the debate, when they don't have any evidence, when they don't have any truth on their side. They call you names. They call you Mossad. They call you this and that, and it's all lies. But they are losing, and the only way that they can escape, like an octopus, and I'll hand it back to Charlie since he's an expert of the name of the octopus, they flood the water with ink. And ink is attacking you, calling you a bastard, calling you Mossad or whatever it may be, but they don't focus on the analytics of the evidence. They don't focus on the facts. They don't measure
they suppress the evidence.
Material. That's right. And they do it in an explosive, well, you've got to hate America. You've got to hate America. You've got to do this. And they just go into this nonsense, which doesn't influence the audience that you attract, Jason, because you've got a higher IQ audience, but it does influence the dullards who are addicted to the mainstream media, who are believing and sucking down hook, line, and sinker the plastic-haired, bleach-teeth game show host, mainstream effeminate metrosexual media guys and masculinized women. The mainstream of America it doesn't have the sensitivity to see just how manipulative and corrupt they really are. And you see it in the advertising too. The scariest thing about America is that it is a medicated society, and you can see that on the Fox News advertisers for Trilexa or Brindexta or Calabresta or whatever it is. For all of these medical ailments, you are causing dementia and Alzheimer's and sicknesses in this country unknown to anything. And then you get into vaccines and everything else. So the American population is physically degrading. That's why militarily, I don't have any fear about us going and kicking the butts of every nation, because our military is only as strong as the individual soldier. And the individual soldier in America, sad to say, is no match for the Chinese or for the Russians, because they have an integrity of personality, of upbringing, of family, of marriage, of healthy natural living, where in America we're saturated with a political correct religion that tries to make healthy marriage, healthy living, healthy families. And if you're a white male, you're the one that needs to be crucified. That is a toxicity in a culture that does not apply to any other culture in the world. And that's very disturbing. Let's focus
for a second on something that you're raising that's very important. Is this focus on, vaccinating everyone? Don't question what the ingredients of the vaccine is. You've got, your legs hurt, here's a pill for that. Your penis doesn't work, here's a pill for that. Are you lonely, bored, annoyed? Here's a pill for that. But you're right, no one's talking about improving the quality of our air, our water, the health of the individual. And it seems the major talking point is, why don't we pay for this health care for everyone? And this 70% tax is something that we forgot to mention. But, Charlie, we've got Sherry in the comments on Periscope saying, okay, we know about all this, but how do we stop it? It takes a long time if it can be done at all. What do you think, Charlie? What is our plan for opposing this octopus of global control that utilizes fake news and all these other things to keep us down?
Well, we realize it's happening, but there are a lot of people out there that don't. Like you talked about, Scott. There's a wide population, percentage of the population that has no idea that what they see on the nightly news is not real. They think they have restless leg syndrome, so they need to get a pill for it. There's a quote in my book from Dr. Russell Blaylock, and he's a neurosurgeon. He talks about how there is a mass of people that have been so dumbed down that they're willing to accept and go along with just about anything that the government or that the media tells them, and that's where the government wants them, because they're dependent, and that way they can't really excel at anything. And then he talks about a very small percentage of high IQ people that can see through all this stuff. It's just clear as day. And we were talking about the media and WikiLeaks, and one of the things about the Hillary Clinton WikiLeaks dump that always stood out to me, and I don't know why everybody didn't notice this, but if you remember when it came out, the media's focus was not on the content of the emails. It was on who got them. That is the equivalent of your buddy coming over to your house, calling you and saying, dude, I went over to your house and I caught your wife in bed with some other guy. And you go, how'd you get in my house?
Right.
Why'd you go over to my house?
Right.
Instead of, whoa, wait, what? Let's focus on the important aspects of this. But
yes.
So the media tried to spin this with, was it Russia? It was Russia that took all these emails. It was Russia, and they blah, blah, blah. Who cares? Even if it was, which it wasn't, but even if it was, who cares? Why don't we talk about the content of these emails? Why don't we talk about the fact that John Podesta is in there saying some really awful stuff? Why don't we talk about the fact that Hillary Clinton was exposed in those emails as being a criminal? I think a lot of people understood that in advance, but there are a lot of people that were on the fence. I think that swung the election. And, it was Russian collusion. Listen, if the election was decided based on who works best with Russia, then the Russians would have swung the election in favor of Hillary, because they were already working with her on the Uranium One deal. So they know she plays ball. They know they can buy her off. They know they can get whatever they want from her through the Clinton Foundation with just a little bit of money. So the fact that the Russians, I think all of us that are watching this understand that the Russian thing is total nonsense. But for the people that are out there that are still thinking the Russians are the boogeyman, besides this just being total McCarthyism 2.0, like how obvious is this? But besides that, Russia would have no incentive to put Donald Trump in there, a virtual unknown, a wild card, when they could have the sure thing in Hillary Clinton. So none of it made any sense. But meanwhile, what are we focusing on? Are we talking, is the general public talking about why is your campaign manager a total scumbag? No, they're talking about, did Russia influence the election? Did Russia influence the election? Of course, they probably tried to. We would never do anything like that in Venezuela or every other country that we tend to get involved in. So the hypocrisy of American foreign policy in conjunction with the obedience of the corporate media is embarrassing to us. I think the world is laughing at us. I think that the general public of the United States is so dumbed down on some levels, but busy, trying to survive. They got everybody on the hamster wheel of life, just trying to keep it going just long enough. And meanwhile, they can't focus on these things. You get 15 minutes of news at night on your nightly news, or 30 minutes of nightly news, 15 minutes of which are commercials for the pharmaceutical industry. And it's hard to process. You don't get the full story. You can't get the full story in a minute or two. And this is another reason why we're so uninformed. And so we go out and we have all these debates. People on the street have these debates, but they're completely unarmed. They don't even have the right information. So they're debating against each other, and they look like morons because they don't they're debating what the media has told them about situations without understanding that the whole narrative is contrived, and it's coming from a place that they don't even know exists. They don't know about the Atlantic Council, and they don't know about the Council on Foreign Relations. They don't know that these places even exist. They just turn on their news, they see the information, they hear the story, and they go about their day with that as their reality. And that's, of course, dangerous. We're all guilty of that. We've all done that on some level. Yeah. But nowadays, it seems like it is so important to be awake to that. And what I've found, and I think you guys have probably found this as well, is that the more you stand back, and sort of try and explain this to people, the more they look at you like you're the crazy person.
That's exactly what I want to touch on. That's exactly what I want to talk about next, Charlie, because, I don't want us to seem like we're insulting the general public, saying that people are dumbed down. My question, and maybe this is a question for Scott, to what extent is this a psychological assault on the American people, where everything you hear on television again, it's like advertising, literally. That little song that goes with McDonald's, when you see that sign, da-da-da-da-da, it goes in your brain. It's a programming, literally, isn't it?
It is. It's a Chinese water torture by communication drips. And it's influencing the emotions and the behavior and the thoughts of people. And they do it through guilt. They do it through, in modern times, as of right now, you see it through these things like, for example, I think what this gay singer, actor guy, whatever, who said he was assaulted, it seems very suspicious, since the police haven't found anything, that this may have been a psyop to pass a civil rights hate crimes bill that has been bouncing around. They do it through this thing. You see it in a lot of the Fetzer reports about false flag. Kevin Barrett's done a lot of material, but false flag attacks, whether it's Vegas or Sandy Hook or Boston Marathon bombing or Florida, when you look at the absence of physical deaths and the obvious mannequin usage and bullets that are just missing, and all of the evidence that you begin to accrue, you see this is all psychological trauma-based mind control to influence people into a fetus position, into a very cowardly, weak, disengaged position. And you have to guard against that with aggression and clarity and fearlessness. And that's why, when people start assaulting you with name calling or things like that, you really have to go on the aggressive counter strike by exposing them and being unapologetic about it. One thing we had talked about before, Jason, was it'll come back to me, but the PSYOP,
the Venezuelan flag at the embassy.
Well, that was another thing. The Venezuelan gay flag, that was another problem for Trump. But I'll head it back to Charlie because I'll come up with it. I was just going to say something we were talking about before the show. It'll come back.
Well, one of the things to follow up on that, the trauma-based mind control that you talk about, much like somebody that is sexually abused when they're younger, as they grow up, they have a decision to make. Are they going to continue the abuse, or are they going to be violently opposed to it and fight against it? And so what we have is
a decision, Charlie, or is it something that
I don't know. I'm not going to pretend to know the scientific reasoning for that. But what we do know is that people either continue the abuse or they pull so far away from it that the last thing they want to do is ever be an abuser towards somebody else because they had it done to them. And I feel like as a society, after 70 years of Operation Mockingbird, of them just hammering us with psychological operations through television, among other things, we have become so beaten down. And now we're the generation, we're the next generation that's in front of the television cameras and things like that. So the question is, are we going to perpetuate this trauma on the rest of humanity, or are we going to be the people that step aside and say, no, I saw what this did. I understand the game. It's been done to us our entire lives. I want nothing to do with that. My decision, just in my life, and I think you guys probably have the same feeling, is that I want to change that. I don't want to be a part of that. I wrote a book. I wrote a lot of information. I brought in voices from different people that had a hand in these important events, and I put that out there, and I put my take on it as well. But more than anything, what I want people to realize is that we have been victimized for the last, for our entire lives, really, for all of us. We've been victimized by a group that is in control, that do not care about us. They're not looking out for our best interest. They're not on our side. The media is not on our side as well. I got a television. I'm excited to watch the Super Bowl. I watched that stuff. I watched some horrible television as well. I'm as guilty of that as anybody. But I also understand that they are on a different team from us, and we are not all playing together on the same side. We are not looking out for the same thing. So the nightly news is a weapon. I always thought of it as a tool to give me information, but what I've discovered over time is that it's a weapon, and it's been turned against us. And the more we're aware of it, the more we talk about this, the more people will start to kind of peel it off. And maybe it's a Boston bombing thing that starts to get a couple people off. Maybe it's the Las Vegas shooting, maybe the Superb Owl. I see you putting up there.
I almost forgot it was Superb Owl Sunday.
It is. It's so funny.
The thing that came back to me, Charlie, we were talking before about the QAnon and the plan and trust sessions and all of the stuff that goes out there. And I shared with Jason, I don't buy into any of that. I don't fall into anything. I continue to march forward on what is right, what is true, what is good, what do we need to be saying to influence all Americans. Because when they say things like, QAnon, trust the plan, trust sessions, that to me is a stand down order.
Yes.
That to me is don't get engaged. Things are happening. Just trust the way. And I don't trust anybody. I don't trust anybody except myself. And that's the safest, healthiest way to move through this world, because it allows us to say, no, I'm not waiting for sessions. I'm not waiting for QAnon. I'm not waiting for the plan. All of this I treat with suspicion and a certain degree of hostility. So we have to. One of your listeners was talking about how do we change this, Jason?
Yeah.
It's through maintaining a aggressive, forward-leaning, marching forward attitude. So we don't rely on QAnon. We don't trust Sessions. We don't trust Trump. We don't trust Pompeo. We don't trust anybody except the truth. What should be said? What is good? What is right? And we're the mainstream media is falling apart. The American society in many regards is falling apart. Look at what Charlie was just talking about. You can summarize in the Antifa movement. You have a whole generation that was brought up in the 90s. Let's say kids that were born in 1990 and after, and now it's 2019. We can even go to 1998, 2000. So you've got a whole generation that's been brought up with a certain mindset that is almost not even metrosexual, but it's hermaphroditic, it's transgender, it's whatever feels good is good for you.
Well, they're also getting scanned at the airport. They're not alarmed to see the army in the train station. They don't think there's a problem with 29 FBI agents kicking in somebody's door if the news says that person is a jerk. I think one way, guys, that people could start to overcome this, you could make a gift, perhaps a Superb Owl Sunday gift of either Shell Game, the book, and you can get that by going to shellgamewhistleblower.com, or perhaps also the Octopus of Global Control, which if you go to the octopusofglobalcontrol.com, you can buy the book there. And I'm not joking. I'm not merely trying to promote the books written by my two esteemed guests today. This is for real. Buy this book. Buy Charlie's book. Buy Scott's book. Give it to a friend who maybe you think needs to be alerted to some of these things, because, I mean, I don't know that I have the answer for what we should do, but I feel like the first part of it is at least getting it out there and trying to overcome this stuff. I'm trying to fight the disinfo with evidence and facts, but of course, Dr. Corsi said to me one time that you can't fight propaganda with the truth. You've got to discredit the source. So perhaps that's something worth considering for people.
Yeah, I would suggest, I mean, with my book, I've always said it's good for people that are on the fence, that are sort of unsure about things, that it's not necessarily the gift for somebody that's watching this themselves, because I think they might have already advanced to a level where they're understanding what the plan is, what the scam is. But somebody in their life that they're trying to break through to, that's a little unsure, maybe they're on the fence, maybe they think you're crazy, maybe you've gone as far as you can on a Thanksgiving dinner table where the room turns against you because you bring up 9/11.
People get angry, don't they, Charlie?
People get angry. People get angry when you challenge their beliefs, and I understand that, and I understand that it can, because, you know, to come to an understanding that something like, as an example, 9/11 is not as it seems. If you understand that, you come to know that as the truth. Then the next step is that you have to start picking around at what else is not the truth as well. And for some people, that's a task that's too monumental of a task for them to take on right now. They're thinking about all the things in their lives that they need to do. And is this, you know, what am I going to do to change it? Well, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to need to educate yourself about this as much as you can, as quickly as you can. And you're going to have to check your ego and understand that we've all been lied to. So don't get hurt by it. Don't feel stupid. Don't feel bad about this. It happened to all of us, but it's what you do from here on out. Are you going to continue this cycle? Do you have kids? Are you going to teach them about what the reality of the situation is, about the reality of the world that we're living in right now? You owe it to yourself to educate yourself first about this, and then those around you. It's kind of like your duty, and if it takes buying books and giving them to people, then do that. If it's just having a 15-minute conversation with somebody that you think you can get through to them. But I'll tell you how not to do it. Don't go to somebody and say, you're wrong, I'm right, you need to listen to me, I'm going to explain how it all works. That is a strategy that I have used before, and it is not a good one. Right. So Yeah.
and also coming out from alliances in the world. We're entering, I think, again, a great separation in this country from the sheep and the goats, or the Antifa type and the conservative types, or whatever. And this is a political mitosis, if you will, a separation that is a very healthy thing. And that's why we're on the alternative media. Is we're deconstructing ourselves. We're disconnecting from a lot of this brainwashing, a lot of the mind control operations, a lot of the guilt trip, and we have to forecast what the rest of the population is going to do. For example, when Judge Ginsburg dies, are you going to have another Kavanaugh protest and people, flagellating themselves in the streets or burning themselves alive, or having massive protests against Trump, beating up and killing people who wear MAGA hats? That is the insanity which is creeping into us, not us, but a certain portion of the population, because they've been raised in an educational environment, a cultural environment that has made them so toxic with doubt, with hate, with confusion, with political correctness, and all of this nonsense. They're really losing their minds, and the result of that is all the violence you see. So we have to forecast what is coming down our way in the next 2 years. Look at the Democrats, for example. Everybody who's going to run for Democrat presidency is probably going to fall apart and lose, except maybe Tulsi Gabbard, because everybody else is about hatred and anger at Trump and all this stuff. Look at the border wall. Most Americans want a border wall because they love their family, where the Democrats are pushing for no wall because they want to take over the country. It's all about power. So the average American is going to gravitate in our direction and away from the political correct Antifa Democrat direction, I forecast.
Right. Yeah, I mean, this whole border debate is absolutely crazy. I mean, Hillary Clinton comes out and says there's people in Syria who want to do us harm, so we've got to be there causing an unsolicited war. But, throngs of invaders, thousands strong, charging the border, attacking law enforcement agents at the border. They should all be allowed into the country, and let's tax to the tune of 70% other people to pay for their medical care, which, by the way, most of that money is just going to the pharmaceutical companies that are advertising on the fake news agencies that we're talking about. We're almost out of time, gentlemen, and I just wanted to touch on something you were talking about, Scott. I don't think anybody can really blame you, Scott, for being skeptical of trusting anyone and even being angry. You're telling us that you brought information of treason. You brought evidence and, detailed, researched by, you were an Army officer, and you were specialized in this type of terrorist financing, and you brought it to Dianne Feinstein, and she sends two guys to you who remain in the news today as the progenitors of fake news. Meanwhile, Dianne Feinstein, Chi-Fi, Spy-Fi, Di-Fi, has got a Chinese guy working for her who is a spy. Nobody's investigating her. Nobody's throwing her in jail with mafiosos playing bocce and Swiss financiers. What the hell is going on over there, Scott?
And she was the chairwoman of the Senate Intelligence Committee. That's what makes it so offensive. Look, I do everything I do out of love for my country, an oath as an officer of the United States Army. And I took it to stand against enemies, foreign and domestic, domestic, because we took an oath, and we love our families, we love our land, our heritage, our culture, and we cannot allow these parasites and corrupt criminals in powers of political influence to get away with doing nothing, Jason. That's where this stands. And I would say the first ones who should be tried and prosecuted are the people in the military that did nothing with this. And the people that I reported to in the military. Again, I was not interested in the military career service or a military profession or getting my consultant card punched or making money in Booz Allen Hamilton. I went into Washington. I went into these areas to serve and stand up for the Constitution. And I don't say that romantically. I just say it as part of a genetic temperament, whether it's Scottish or what. But when I went in and started finding things and reporting them, and was prosecuted, and David Shalala, Donna Shalala's nephew, becomes my attorney, and all of this deep state stuff comes out like the clown in the tin box, I didn't back down. I didn't apologize. I didn't say, okay, I won't say a word. I got more aggressive. I got more combative. I went right at them, and I will continue to go right at them until we have a whole new generation, a whole new offensive. I hope and pray Donald Trump is the man to do it. But if he's not, I'm not going to wait for him. I'm not going to take orders from him. I'm going to continue fighting as hard as I can so that the more people who watch will go, this guy's telling the truth. He has the real material. He was there, and he's not backing down. He's not afraid of death. He's not afraid of anything. That's what true Americans should be about. Because if we're not in a mentality of preserving our freedom, preserving our constitutional rights, preserving our right to speak, preserving our Second Amendment, preserving our country through protection against illegal immigration, preserving our country through stopping foreign wars that are decimating our population and our treasury, then we are no longer that city on a hill. We've become this police state octopus that Charlie has started the conversation about. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate what you're saying, Scott, and it's really important that the viewers right now. Oh boy, I screwed up on the switcher here. I was going to point out that people can follow Scott on Twitter by going to twitter.com, and he's on there at Army PsyOp, and you can purchase his book, of course. I had such a great thing set up for taking us out, but I screwed it all up. You can purchase his book at shellgamewhistleblower.com. The book, of course, is Shell Game. People can follow Charlie Robinson on Twitter by going to twitter.com. He is Moefus, which is strange, but there it is. You can follow him.
It's a made-up name. Some kid, growing up, some kid used to call this girl that on the school bus, and it turned into just this big kind of goofy name. And and it's one of those login things that nobody else has, so you can get it pretty easily. But
well, there you go. So at Moefus is going to tell you about the
I want to say credit
octopus.
to Scott. I want to say something really quick. Credit to Scott, because a lesser person would have just thrown their hands up and said, "I've done my part. I am out of here." Like, what's the point of this all? Why am I going to continue to put myself in harm's way? But to go through what you went through and to come out and to be even more determined to get to the bottom of it says a lot about you and your character. I think that's fantastic. We should all aspire to do that. So credit to you, Scott.
Thank you, brother.
Absolutely. I want to thank both of you gentlemen. Just really, you guys are great patriots. You're working hard against adversity. And of course, Charlie's book, The Octopus of Global Control, you can get it from the octopusofglobalcontrol.com. I hope that people will go there and pick up the book. Scott's book, Shell Game, is available to you at shellgamewhistleblower.com. I want to thank Scott Bennett and Charlie Robinson for joining me today. If people are going to be in Mexico and not jumping a wall, you'll be able to see Charlie at, you're going to be speaking at Acapulco in February sometime?
I'll be speaking at the Dollar Vigilante Summit and Acapulco. Yeah, starting the 12th of Mexico. Yeah, I'm going to be the only one going the reverse, or 12th of February. I'll be going over the wall. I'll be going over the wall the other direction to go to Mexico. Anyway, but yeah, it'll be fun. Anarchist and cryptocurrency convention. So come check it out.
Yeah, just make sure you get Mexico to pay for that. I want to thank you guys both for joining me today. Really important conversation. I'll be back later tonight only on Patreon with Kevin Shipp. We've got the intelligence assessment with Kevin Shipp at 7 p.m. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you then.